Okay, the last in the API monetization track, though you could easily do an API monetization conference, because now people, like we said, are understanding the value of it. It doesn't mean they understand how to do it. So Derric, I think you coming on is a great way to, position us in the right way of summarizing the day with best practices for API monetization. You want to share your slides?
Yep. Can you see them now?
Yes, I can. And how long have you been in the API community or API world?
Oh gosh, it's been quite a few years. Back even before I started Moesif, we had our own e-commerce platform and had to figure out, do we monetize these APIs with our partners, or is it something that we offer for free? And now we started Moesif, which is the leading API analytics platform, and the way to think about everything from analytics to developer experience, billing, monetizing APIs. And we just love talk about APIs. It is the way forward for delivering a lot of these different products and experiences for customers.
Okay, well, take it away, Derric. Let's do this.
Definitely. So I guess that's a good segue to who I am. I'm the co-founder CEO of Moesif, the leading API analytics platform. I love talking about API strategy, how to monetize APIs, and little known fact, I love IPAs. So if you're ever in San Francisco, you can find me at Zeitgeist and some of the different breweries and bars out here. Today, we're going to talk about monetization. This in particular is for folks who are trying to create an API as a product, and also how to create more of a self-service way to monetization. But what we've seen is that selling to developers is hard. There's a lot of different developer personas out there. You have junior developers, you have VP of engineering or engineering leadership. But even more importantly, you have not invented here syndrome. A lot of developers want to show off, what they built. It's a way for them to get promoted. It's a way for them to get visibility into their projects. And they're also, skeptical of sales and marketing, right? So just because SDR, reaches out to developers saying, hey, you can save X and X dollars or, get Y and Y revenue, doesn't necessarily mean a developer cares, right? What they care about is what they're building and showing off. There's also always a constant stream of higher priority tasks, new bug fixes that need to go in, security fixes, project priorities, and so on. But beyond just what the developer cares about, there's other stakeholders you need to consider. There's legal and security review, you have product priorities, what the product managers or, leadership is saying. And then you have things like finance procurement. You have SOC 2 compliance you have to think about, things like vendor review and onboarding. All of these things are areas that maybe a developer doesn't care about or doesn't want to bother with. And so that's where this whole notion of land developers first, and there's a couple of different clauses for this: developer first, bottoms up SaaS, product-led growth. They all mean roughly the same thing, which is getting a developer to pay a token amount for your API. That could be $50 a month, maybe it's $100 a month or $500 a month, or even just purchasing a few credits, if you have some type of credit system. And what this enables you to do is open up your funnel to a wide variety of different developers that would have been able to purchase your solution before. For example, small startups, you might have freelancers or small projects and that type of stuff. And also allows them to get to paying for your service in a very short amount of time. Why is this so? Well, many times you don't have to do stuff like legal and security review. Instead, it's just a click-through terms of service. They can get integrated really quickly. Don't have to deal with stuff like acceptance testing or load testing. They don't have to deal with procurement. Instead, it might be just $100 a month on a manager's credit card, and that could be discretionary, for a lot of tech companies. So it's super fast to get started with paying for that solution. Of course, that's not the end game here. In this case, what we're trying to do is sell through developers, right? So if you have an API, and let's say it's a e-commerce API or e-commerce platform, you might have some other additional requirements for leadership, whether that's reporting requirements, maybe it's for auditing, some of the stuff happening there, or maybe it's for stuff like single sign-on. These are additional features that allow you to upsell in a way. The second piece, of course, is increasing usage. We see this a lot within APIs, given it's very transactional. So whether it's increasing number of transactions per month, or maybe monthly tracked users, or something along those lines. And the last piece is you can sell to other teams, whether that's different business teams and lines of business and so on. But each API business is different. So today we're going to talk about different billing models and pricing models, things like prepaid versus postpaid, or whether you want to do a pay-as-you-go model versus more of a traditional tier pricing, which we see a lot happening within SaaS. And when to invoice. Is it at the beginning before they use a service, or is it after they use a service for a while and then you send them an invoice for what the last month's usage was? So let's walk through each of these key areas. First, we're going to talk about prepaid versus postpaid. But let's first do some definitions. So what is prepaid? This is like buying a cell phone, what do you call it? A little gift card, at the store. You pay for $50 worth of credits, and you burn those down, over the course of a month, or maybe it's a couple of days, and then the developer can, top off or purchase more credits. Sometimes that's done automatically, or they have to log into a web portal and do that. Postpaid is a little different, which is, customers are only paying for the usage they already did or used up. And this usually happens in SaaS tiered models where, you look at the last month's usage and you bill them for, whatever that is. Why would one want to do prepaid billing? Well, it's better cash flow. You get that cash up front before you even spent a dime on servicing that API. It's also more familiar with traditional enterprise sales. Most enterprise contracts these days are prepaid. You're paying up for a year up front, or maybe it's 3 years or whatever it is. But there's also a few cons here. It creates more friction in your onboarding process. Now they're paying for a service before they even made their first API call when they're on the paid plan. Also makes it harder for pay-as-you-go. In particular, what is a developer going to pay for? Is it 50 transactions, or is it 5 million transactions? They haven't had a chance to even do some measurement or some metering to understand what usage tier they actually need. And so this actually creates some decision paralysis and over analyzing how much they should purchase or commit to. On the postpaid side, this does reduce the friction in your onboarding flow. They're able to get started, and then deal with the bill later. It also makes pay-as-you-go easier because now you're only billing for what they actually used. And so remove some of that decision-making process that a developer has to make. With that said, there is some risk. In particular, it can be abused, especially if this is an API that has higher costs associated with it in terms of COGS. For example, API that has human labor or work involved. Think like Amazon Trunk and that type of stuff. What if the customer does not pay their invoice, but you already paid those other folks to manage that service or offering? Tiered versus pay-as-you-go is another big thing that we've been seeing, especially with Amazon Lambda and other services pushing out the pay-as-you-go model. We even saw Algolia move towards a pay-as-you-go model versus what they had before. And there's definitely some benefits there, but there's also some things that you need to think of. But let's first define what this is. Tiered is what we think of as a traditional SaaS pricing. You go to a pricing page, you see like a free plan, and then there's maybe a grow plan or like a starter plan. And it's already packaged with a certain amount of usage. Maybe there's some certain features that are part of that package, but you're basically purchasing that whole package at once. Versus pay-as-you-go, you might be just purchasing, on a per transaction. In Twilio's case, it's per SMS message. In Stripe's case, it's per dollar in terms of transaction fees. There's different ways to do pay-as-you-go. We also see things like monthly tracked users, which we're seeing with stuff like Segment and some of the stuff in the analytics space. But let's look at the pros for tier pricing. It many times enforces a min spend. So especially if you have support costs and you have to help these developers, ensures that they're paying at least $100 a month or a couple $100 a month, and you don't have to deal with developers who are spending 50 cents per month. It's also predictable for the customer. So it gives them some room to grow, right, without a lot of fluctuation from month to month. These days, even with credit cards where you can have a limit on that credit card, that can be a little tricky. How large is that limit and that type of stuff? It's also extremely easy to implement because all you have here is rigid or fixed tiers to meter. You don't have to deal with metering and billing based off that metering and all that stuff. But there are some cons. They can create some friction in expansion because you're going to have developers that could easily move to the next tier or consume more of your API, but they're unwilling to make that jump to the next tier, especially if the jump is quite large. The other big piece is it could be a turnoff, right? They're looking at these different packages and they say, well, I only need this, but you're offering this plus X, Y, and Z, and now it seems like there's waste. Whereas when you look at pay-as-you-go, it's a lot more efficient for the customer. They're only paying for what they really are using in terms of your API. It can also create less friction in the expansion because now they're just, they start off with a very small amount. Maybe they're just purchasing $1 worth of, S3 or APIs Lambda, but then in a couple months, as they ship to production, that usage grows and you're also able to, reap the benefits of that. And so it can appear cheaper, especially when the developer is first starting out. But the biggest con is it can cause billing surprises. What about developers who sign up and then their use is increasing maybe 50% or 500% in 1 week? How do you make sure and manage that cost and set up whether it's automated alerts and notifications so the developer knows what to do here? It can also be extremely hard to implement. You have to now meter and track each of your customers' usage and make sure you're able to tally it up correctly and have a way to audit that. So if there is a discrepancy in that bill, you're able to go back and look at how you metered and what they did and so on. Another area to think about is when to actually invoice and collect payment. Recurring, which we see a lot within the typical SaaS world, is collecting that or invoicing that customer on a monthly basis. Maybe it's quarterly. Maybe you have like a year plan and they can pay for a year up front. Makes it much easier for the finance team to manage because already, especially for stuff like revenue recognition, it's also more predictable because now you can expect that monthly or yearly bill when they renew that subscription. But it can be costly for low cost SaaS. So for example, if you look at Twilio's case where they have folks who might be only using 50 cents worth of SMS messages or $1 when they're first starting out. Those credit card fees, can be costly and also to manage and reconcile those invoices and everything. So it can be complex also if it's prepaid. Because in this case, how do you actually do a monthly payment for a certain amount that you don't even know what the transaction volume is? Many times for when you do a monthly payments or yearly payments, you have to do postpaid, right? That way you know exactly what the usage is. Otherwise, it's just a guesstimation game. When you look at threshold-based, which is popularized by the ad industry, you wait for certain spend to happen or maybe transaction volume to happen, and then you invoice the customer. So, for example, $500 worth of ads, or maybe $50 worth of transactions or widgets, and then you go send them the invoice. The tricky thing here is it's harder for finance to recognize revenue. It can be quite complex, especially if a customer is getting 3 or 4 or 5 invoices in 1 month. So how do you manage those thresholds and make sure you can grow with your customers? And as their usage grows, those thresholds should be able to change. It can also increase company liability, especially if you're merging threshold-based and prepaid billing. Because what's happening here is you now have a lot of outstanding credits that you have to now manage on your balance sheet. So, for example, if you spent $1,000 and now you're holding $1,000 worth of credits in your system. There's a couple pitfalls, though, with self-service that I want to touch on. One of the biggest is account management is not scalable. It's one thing to have 20 or 50 accounts to manage. It's a whole different ball game when you're dealing with thousands or tens of thousands of developers. How do you support them while keeping your own support costs low? there's going to be, issues, right? This is not, a consumer app where it's super easy to get started with and use. There's going to be issues during onboarding. Developers will ask questions around SDKs. Maybe it's not supported in their environment or their setup, or they need some additional functionality. There's going to be changing business needs. How do you add more seats or transaction volume or adjustments to what they have? Maybe it's a new product offering they need. And what I just mentioned earlier, which is billing surprises. What happens when a developer runs into a rate limit or quota limit, or maybe they get a sticker shock because they didn't see those emails or of how quickly their usage is increasing. So one thing we usually recommend is make everything as self-service as possible. So everything from plan management or subscription management to ways to look at the usage. A developer as a customer of your API platform should be able to track what are they using in terms of usage. What did they use in the last month in terms of transaction volume? Can they look at a history of API calls so they can debug their integration? Are they able to get notified when they get run into a rate limit? All these things should be self-service, and this reduces the burden on your support team, especially once you start getting into these tens of thousands or even maybe millions of developers. Like we mentioned earlier, avoid surprises by over communicating with developers. Any single time something could go wrong or could be concerning, you should have an email that notifies that developer. The one example here that I'm stressing is quota limits, and when they go over their quota, set up an automated workflow so they get notified. Hey, you're 105% over whatever your plan is. But you can go beyond just subscription quotas. Things like deprecating an endpoint. Let the developer know that they're using that deprecated endpoint. Set up a plan to this endpoint is going to be out of service at the end of next year. This is the transition plan. Same thing when they run into issues. Let's say they have a lot of 400 errors or something. Send them an email, and a lot of these different notifications can be automated, whether it's through your email choice. This is of course some of the reasons why we built Moesif is to handle some of this stuff. The second piece is reducing friction through payments itself. There's a lot of different marketplaces they can integrate with. Amazon has a marketplace for AWS. There's an Azure marketplace, GitHub, and so on. And each of these allows you to reduce friction further. This way, if that manager's credit card gets canceled because a manager moved on to a different company or team, you're able to still have those invoices because you're just a line item on their AWS bill, which is probably quite large anyways. It also allows you to increase that usage without worrying about when that limits on the credit card are reached. You can actually just, again, be that line item on the AWS bill. One of the benefits of this too is many times large enterprise contracts will have a committed use with AWS. That way you're able to be a part of that allocation they already have. So it's money that's already been allocated for stuff like AWS contracts versus new money. Lastly, when you are self-service, it's going to be hard to get feedback from customers because you can't chat with every single developer. There's just too many of them. So one way to handle this is through analytics. So tracking things like time to first API call or time to first hello world. And more importantly, tracking things like time to first working app. So in this case, we have a funnel set up, and this is a 4-stage funnel, which is what we recommend for folks who have self-service API or developer first API. In this case, we're tracking that page visit. Usually we're attributing things like which channel they came from. Is it ads versus maybe content versus sales initiatives? When do they sign up for your service? And how long does it take for them to make that first hello world? So that's usually like the first API call. That could be done through something like Postpaid or curl, but at least they're testing out your platform and they are spending the time to explore this further. Doesn't necessarily mean that they recognize the full value out of it yet, because they're expecting to integrate your API with a full, mobile app or web app, not just to test it out with Postman, but that's at least the first step. And then they get to first working app. And that's where they're truly getting value out of whatever your API offers, whether that's, bringing in dollars for the company or users, or maybe that mobile app is now released in the App Store and they have users, using that integration solution. And that's, of course, a show-off moment for the developer saying, hey, I built this, and this is the cool tools that I use for this. And we usually see, the first 3 steps, many times you're not monetizing at all. You're waiting for that person to test it out, and then it's not until they really need the volume or the usage requirements to get to that plan. What to measure? There's usually 2 things we usually recommend. First is a conversion rate. So how many of your developers get to next step? Is it 5% of developers who sign up end up activating, or is it 45%? Depending on that metric, you might want to take a look at your onboarding flow, and is there any struggles or pains that a developer is running into before they get to that first hello world or first working out. The second piece is how long does it take? Is it 30 minutes or hour, or is it 2 weeks? Because that may mean you need a different way to think about email marketing, drip campaigns, nudge them to the right step. Or maybe a developer is getting lost. They came back 2 weeks later, but what were they doing in the meantime? Lastly, going back to what to track here, we also recommend tracking the developer themselves, getting demographics through tools like Clearbit and other social tools out there. That way you can see what industry they're in, what their experience level is like, what frameworks they're using. If you put this all together, you're able to track those, activation rates and time to first API call, and break it down by industry that the developer is in. Are they, a VP engineering, or are they IC level? To truly understand, who your product or API resonates with. In this example here, we're building up a funnel. In this case, we're showing sign up to that very first purchase transaction, and then we're breaking it down by marketing campaigns. So we can see Facebook ads, drip campaigns, folks coming in through GitHub. Maybe they're searching for that SDK or solution. We see here that Reddit is around 42% activation rate. It takes 7 hours on average. The key takeaway here is when you start thinking about monetizing an API and trying to build that self-service business, is how do you create a great self-service onboarding and manage it almost as if you have account management, but it's scalable, right? So that's where all these automations and notifications can be extremely helpful, because it seems like you're able to touch and communicate with every developer, even though you don't have the bandwidth to do so. And that's all I have. If there's any other questions around monetizing APIs or API first strategy, feel free to email me at derric@moesif.com.
There you go. Look at that on the screen. Yeah, I think it was a really good summary of how to make the most of it and how to really understand from your customers, clients, partners, API consumers, because they can be internal, right? The different best practices. And then what would be one really big F up that people do that you should warn them about? Like what not to do? What would be the biggest challenge or mistake people make in API monetization?
Under communicate is the biggest one we've seen. We've even been there, and we're still always working on it, which is making sure a developer knows of key events, whether it's errors that are happening, whether they had over usage or increasing their usage quickly, making sure they're able to get those notifications and know that, okay, maybe they could start having an enterprise price discussion, get some committed use discount or something like that, or maybe use a feature differently to reduce their cost, or they're using a deprecated endpoint that they didn't know of, and then suddenly the service stopped working. Just over communicate as much as possible. Trust me, you won't be spamming anyone, and just make sure you have a way for people to opt out. with those emails, but it's better to over communicate than under communicate.
Fair enough. Yeah, because no one likes surprising, and no API is going to be as big as the big 3 cloud providers. And there's a certain one that does a lot of surprise spending, but people are kind of locked in, but people will leave if you piss them off. So I think that's a really valid point. Thank you so much, Derric. And thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to throw you